Georgia came into this season coming out of 2023 with a 13-1 record. This year, not as good record-wise, finished 11-3. Coached by Coach Kirby Smart for his 9th season, and had a final ranking of number 6 across the AP and coaches poll. So what are some thoughts you have, Street?
Well, the early thought is that this is probably the worst Georgia team that we've seen in the last few years. Under Kirby Smart, Georgia has been a solid playoff contender year in, year out. And while they did win the SEC this year, which is a great accomplishment in and of itself, they just weren't that level. You could call it elite, like they've been in recent years. It was just uncharacteristic. They struggled on the offensive line. They certainly struggled running the ball this year, which was a major issue that you haven't seen. And they just struggled with things like drops and penalties. They also had a lot of injuries too, keeping people healthy throughout the year. There were some definite highlights this season, though. Georgia had one of the toughest schedules in the country. They obviously went on the road and beat Texas at Austin. They beat Clemson to open the season, who obviously made the playoffs, and they also beat Tennessee at home. So 3 wins over future playoff teams, an SEC championship over Texas. But, of course, they fell in the playoffs to Notre Dame. After the injury to Carson Beck, it was just a little too much for them to overcome.
Yeah, it was a challenging season for sure. Still a great year for Georgia. We did see a lot of uncharacteristic things that we haven't seen over the past couple seasons, like you mentioned, lack of a running game. But yeah, and then all the drops at wide receiver. That was an area where Georgia led the nation. So hey, number 1 in a stat there. And the offensive line, it had its troubles. We did see a lot of shuffling going on the offensive line. There were some injuries. But even when everybody was there still wasn't any type of, push to help the running game, or it was just a really weak offensive line performance that we haven't really seen at Georgia in quite some time.
Yeah, I mean, I think offensive line injuries combined with running back injuries kind of was a perfect storm for the issues that Georgia had in the running game. Tate Ratledge missed a number of games. Ernest Green played throughout the season, but was clearly not healthy. And then, at the running back position, ETN missed a few games. Roderick Robinson and Branson Robinson both missed almost the entire season. So that left a lot on Nathan Frazier as a true freshman to come in there. And by all accounts, Nathan Frazier had a fantastic year, but that's a lot to ask of a true freshman coming in. And it just made for a lack of ability to kind of move the ball and control the clock. And it led Georgia to rely a lot on the passing game, but then with inconsistent pass catchers, drops, and other things, and Carson Beck going through a touch in the middle of the season where he threw a lot of interceptions, it just wasn't the same. Georgia went from, one of the most high-powered, best-scoring offenses to one that really struggled a lot this year.
Yeah, it was a Jekyll and Hyde type deal for the offense. They were either really, really good, scoring a lot of points, or really, really bad, throwing lots of picks, turning the ball over. And that was pretty much how the whole season went, even all the way to the final game against Notre Dame.
Yeah. I mean, even if you look at that Alabama game early in the season, that might have been a true microcosm of the season as a whole.
Absolutely.
Poor tackling, giving up long plays early, giving up this big, huge lead, but then having the firepower to come back and to clamp down on defense, but then ultimately losing at the end. I think that game showed the cracks in Georgia, and it also showed the strength in Georgia. And at the end of the day, this was a good team, good enough to win the SEC, but just not good enough to be a national title contender that a lot of people expected them to be when they named them number 1 preseason.
Yeah, I think, Georgia really had some struggles in their number 2 corner position this past year. You saw that in the Alabama game. So that was also, I think, a big piece of the puzzle there. But overall, great season. you win the SEC, you make the playoff. A lot of teams would love to be in that position. You know, you're in the dance, you have a seat at the table, and you have a chance to go win a national championship. And Georgia just fell short against Notre Dame.
Yep. So, Burrow, what would you grade Georgia for this season?
Okay, so I'm doing my grading based off of, how the teams actually finished in comparison to the expectations. So, for example, with Georgia, their expectation is be in the national championship, win the national championship. So that obviously didn't happen. So for my grade, I'm going to give Georgia a B minus because they did win their conference. They did make the playoff, but they didn't advance. They didn't go to the national championship, obviously didn't win it. So winning the Natty, that's an A for me. Anything below that is not winning the Natty at certain levels.
Okay. So for my grade, I based it on expectations and how the season turned out. Georgia was expected to be a national title contender and had been in contention for the last few years. They were a preseason favorite. They did manage to win their conference. They were the number 2 seed into the playoffs. So, by that, it was very successful. However, losing to a lower rated team in the playoffs and not advancing at least to the semifinals is disappointing. So for me, I gave Georgia a grade of a B for the 2024 season.
All right. So we have to settle this. What is going to be the Nitro Show final grade? So if I'm at a B minus, you're at a B.
I think the SEC championship is kind of the dividing line there. It's hard to say that a team wins the SEC championship and at least doesn't earn a B in my book. Any conference champion, it would be hard to say that. Winning your conference, despite it not being as important as it used to be, is still a big accomplishment. And especially in this day and age of expanded playoffs and the schedule that Georgia faced, to me, I think they at least deserve to be for this season.